TTB Music Podcast.
Yeah, usually it takes us at least halfway in the year to get this far behind.
Record. Rather than records.
Yeah. Welcome to April and podcast 2.
Oh dear. The wheels came off.
Yeah. For those people that have thought we may have stopped the podcast, hard luck.
Hard luck, we're back.
And we've got, just for a change, we've got some new records, or less new than they would have been, but newish. The latest album from Editors, Violence, Young Fathers, Cocoa Sugar, Dessa, Chime, Lucy Dacus, or Dacus, not sure.
I'm going to go with Dacus.
Historian, Jonathan Wilson, Rare Birds, and The Breeders, All Nerve. So let's start with the only artist on the list who we've reviewed before on the podcast. Well, that was quite a while ago.
It was. I looked it up.
Which is The Editors. I think it was 2 albums ago, was it?
3.
Three
In this
albums ago.
light
Oh.
and on this evening.
Yeah.
2009.
Wow.
Wow.
We like that record.
That's prehistory.
Do we like this record?
Yes, I like this record. This record is okay. Without meaning to sound unkind, they've not been very sort of. There haven't been many releases in the 9 years in between. We've only missed about 2 in between, I think.
Okay.
So, in terms of progression, probably not very much. But actually, in terms of an enjoyable album, dare I you say it so early in the podcast, even a solid album.
In the context of this podcast, it's a solid album. I have
Excellent.
written in my
You
notes.
wrote your notes. Fantastic. This is a solid album. The reason I looked it up, the reason why I looked up In This Light on this evening, is because I remember that album having quite an impact and actually turning around my view on the Editors at that point.
Ditto, and I'd seen them live before then as well, and still wasn't totally sold.
Still not totally. And this album, I suppose, continues that in that I found it solid. That's twice. Highlights for me. Let's do highlights. Highlights for me while we warm up after this great absence. Can't slag them off for absence. Jeez. No. Highlights for me: Violence, the title track, Hallelujah, which in many ways I started off thinking this is kind of sub Coldplay, but done well. You've written that as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, I had to join in there, but I said, continue to tread a line that seems to be a bit Coldplay, a bit U2, and yet manage to be less annoying than either. Exactly,
it manages to be less annoying than either of those bands. They do it well, and they do it cool. And Counting Spooks was towards the end of the album as well, was a favourite of mine. What I quite liked about the overall, what perhaps distinguishes this record from previous, is it's very 80s. Yeah.
Arrangements and instrumentation is still not strongly to the early 80s. See, I don't have to do my bit in a minute because I wrote like six bullet points, and you've pretty much covered 4 of them already.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll stop there. But needless to say, enjoyed this album.
I think you're right. It doesn't do anything new particularly, although it's I would say arguably slightly more poppy than the previous.
I think that's
things.
the 80s vibe. It's poppy, but done in a sort of 80s way.
I mean, in addition to the tracks you mentioned, I also quite like Magazine, which I think was the single, which is a good pop tune.
Yeah.
And also the No Sound But the Wind, which is a really kind of atmospheric kind of ballad.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the album, which I also quite liked. But yeah, it's as you say, it's not going to set the world alight.
No.
But it's enjoyable enough, and if you already like the Editors, I'm sure this is not going to be too much of a disappointment.
No, absolutely.
And a new bit of the podcast, I will tell you that the editors are on tour during October and playing Brixton Academy on the 24th of October.
Wow, it's an information service. You're making up for lost time.
Yeah. Okay.
Good work.
So, next up we have Young Fathers, third album from Mercury Prize-winning band. The prize for their first full album, I think it was.
Yeah.
From Scotlandshire.
Ah.
And this album is one of those wonderful musical breaths of fresh air that I get occasionally on this podcast, and reminded me very early on of why I still love music and why I still enjoy doing this rather self-indulgent podcast each month.
Not really.
Yeah.
No bugger listening.
Yeah. This is kind of an album that's just over 30 minutes long, so also big tick from my point of view. But in that 30 minutes, it's packed full of ideas, draws on hip-hop, krautrock, synth-pop, gospel, neo-soul, and kind of blends them all together in a kind of seamless kind of way into an album that's both accessible and commercial in a strange kind of way, but also seems to do so without seeming to, from the artist's point of view, kind of compromise their musical integrity and authenticity and what they're trying to do. It's a very multifaceted, I suppose the word, multifaceted kind of inventive work that just literally, I think I was about 30 seconds into the opening track, See How, and I kind of thought, I'm going to like this.
Oh. Wow.
Lots of repeated loops and stuff like that, as you might expect from the genre, but again, I think it's done so well that you don't really notice that much because the songs are constructed so well. There's kind of lyrical overtones at the album that cover things like seizing opportunities in life, and there's quite a lot of it's not a religious album, but there's quite a lot of religion covered in the lyrical matter of the songs, although quite a lot of it is I think I wrote one of them down. It's like, I think this is in Holy Ghost, where it said, the only time I go to church is when someone's in a casket. Good men are strange, bad men are obvious. This is a lot of that kind of thing. But just overall, as each track moved into the next track, I was neither bored for any moment in the album, and each time it went on, I have to say, the first time I played it, I got to the end of Picking You, and partly because it's only just over 30 minutes long, I immediately started listening to it again. I could pick out favourite tracks, but to be honest, I really like the whole album, so I'm going to say early on in this podcast, and in podcast 2, I doubt there'll be many better albums released this year than this album.
Grief. Wow.
I like it.
Yeah. I thought it was alright. I can't top that, but I'll try. No, I won't. Yeah, I think this album for me suffered from actually perhaps from how little time I was able to give it. But I reflect on a lot of what you've said in terms of the different switches between genres and genres within genres. Kept it very interesting. From the very first track, I actually had the opposite view initially. I thought, oh no, I don't think I'm going to like this. But actually, as the album progressed through, and you got a sense of being on a musical journey, it's sort of bedded in. And if only I'd had time to repeat listen as you did once you got to the end of the final track. A very creative album, very interesting what you said actually about, you know, skirting the line between commercial and not really accessible. It's recorded in a very lo-fi way as well, which is a real gamble. Artists were doing this all the time a few years ago. Do you remember the number of albums we listened to that sounded like they were recorded in someone's bedroom or basement? And by the end, it just became a bit cliche and sounded terrible. Here, it's actually done really well from that sort of production viewpoint. So credit to the band for that. Definitely worth a repeated listen.
They are playing Victoria Park in London on 25th of May.
Really? We're doing this?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the only UK gig I can find for them at the moment, so
Okay.
unless you're going to be in Victoria Park,
This is awesome.
you ain't seeing them.
You know,
No, Tom, Brad, it's
I'm going to start taking notes.
It's 2018, Pete. We have to kind of expand the brand.
Extra value.
Extra value. Expand the brand.
Expand the brand. Value proposition.
Yeah. So next up, and I suppose staying with hip hoppy urban leaning artists.
Yes.
We move on to the fourth studio album by another artist I wasn't familiar with until this podcast.
Oh.
Called Dessa. I mean, she's got that's not her actual name clearly, but Dessa and Chime. Peter.
In many ways, I've approached this album in a similar way to you approached the previous album, in that I knew from the outset I was actually going to enjoy it. The extent to which I have enjoyed this album, I couldn't have predicted. I actually really like this album. This is one of the records that I have done a couple of repeat listens on. I think, again, yes, urban, but manages to sort of skirt a line between that and something much more commercial without actually tipping over into a commercial side of things. It remains interesting musically throughout, but most important of all, lyrically very, very savvy.
Yes.
And sassy. It's very smart lyrically. It's got that sort of great humour that I guess only certain songwriters achieve, and it's able to. And I've no doubt you've got a list of examples, so I'm not going to pull out.
I've got a couple. In fact, I emailed you one earlier on.
You did. So I'm not going to refer to that. But even early on in the album, there's political references done smart as well. Very early on, there's a lyric along the lines of, it seems that gender's now sorted, but race is back in.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very, very smart.
Yeah, it's in the opening track, right, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, gender politics, particularly female politics or feminism, comes into a few of the tracks throughout the album, but it's done cool. It's done well. Go on then, quote some lyrics.
I will quote some lyrics in a minute, but first of all, I'm going to concur as well. I also love this album.
Yeah.
And one of the joys of it, in fact, is the fact that whilst it does the rap spoken word bit justice, it also, because of her own personal tastes, ticks the hey, I'm going to throw in a kind of pink Beyonce type track here and there as well. So you've got Half of You, particularly towards the end, and Boy Crazy in the middle of the album, that are both just pop tunes.
Yeah, Boy Crazy is a brilliant pop tune.
But yeah, as you say, lyrically, there's just almost too many examples to pick. I mean, throwaway lines. I mean, the one I sent you, which is in 5 of 6, which I really liked, is that I brought a chisel tip to this pencil fight, which I think is just a great line, just generally. But also one of the stronger songs lyrically, our focus level is Fire Drills, which is about the whole issue of if you're a woman going travelling alone and the hassles of doing so, depending on where you go in the world. And then that kind of thing. There's one of the things in that says, as a woman, always something left to take, so you shouldn't try and stay too late or talk to strangers. Look too long, go too far out of range, because angels can't watch everybody all the time. Stay close, hems low, safe inside. That formula works if you can live it, but it works by putting half the world off limits. And that's not even covering the arguably the funniest line in that song, which is "Tell patient zero he can have his rib back."
Yes. This is the other one.
Yeah, it's a great record. It's quite funny when I picked these albums to do the podcast. My idea before sitting down of what my favourite album of the podcast would be turned out to be totally wrong. And when we get to that album, it's arguably my least favourite album of the podcast.
All right, okay.
So this is a great record, and disappointingly, her show at Birthdays on April the 19th in London is sold out.
Oh.
However, if you're in Manchester, you can catch her at the Soup Kitchen on the 20th.
All right.
We move from there, and actually, I can link to that because one of the songs on Chime is actually a really nice song about a grandmother and death, and their two different approaches to religion. Hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And that does tie in nicely with the next album from Lucy Dacus, because there's a track on her album called Pillars of Truth, which is also about her grandmother and looking back on her grandmother's life. And again, talking of lyrics and talking about songs starting and you immediately kind of going, yeah, I think I'm going to like this. Night Shift, which is the opening track on this album, opens with a line, "The first time I tasted somebody else's spit, I had a coughing fit." Like, I thought, gonna like this. I do like this. This opening track, which is a kind of 6 minutes song covering kind of the end of a relationship, I think it's an absolute cracker because it covers the lengths you'll go to avoid them. And in her instance, in this, it's he works during the day, so she's taking a night shift to make sure she's sleeping during the day, so she's not going to bump into him and all that kind of thing. And it also has that great kind of indie pop thing of starting off kind of mellow and stuff, and then kind of building to a kind of indie guitar loudness at the end, which is really nice. That kind of sets the kind of standard for this album, really. An album that covers all your kind of indie points, from gentle acoustic indie to slightly grungy indie, and it's just another really, really lovely record. Again, somebody I hadn't heard of before. Good lyrics, good songs. Time Fighter, particularly, is a Time Fighter and Next of Kin, along with Night Shift and Addictions at the start of the album, were particular standout tracks for me. But again, it was an album that I got through quite quickly and kind of thought, yeah, I like that. Listen to it again. A first good indie album of the year, I would say. Sadly, her gig at London on the 25th of this month is also sold out, but she is on tour through other parts of the UK. Check press for details, as I believe the professionals say. So moving swiftly on, because unless you have anything else to say on that. It's almost as if I want to get to the pub, Pete. I don't know what it is. It's like,
it's almost like you're in a rush to see something or be somewhere else. I can't figure it out. No, I'll keep it.
There's so many podcasts to do. I just want to get on to the next one.
I'll keep this one brief. I know exactly how you feel. Again, mixture styles. I again had the opposite thought when this started. I thought, oh, it's another one of those singer-songwriters that Scott likes. And then it went all indie, and I was just like, oh, good. Let's just shake it up a bit. Yeah, as with the previous album, lyrically very strong. Not my favourite album of the podcast, and again probably deserves a repeated listen. But yeah, go on then.
Okay, moving on, back to you again, but this time with Rare Birds, the third solo album from Jonathan Wilson, who is probably as well known for his producing as he is for being a solo artist. He produced the first Father John Misty album and albums by Doors and Conor Oberst and people like that. Anyways, this is his third solo album, which, put in context, comes off a stint of him playing in Roger Waters' touring, doing some Floyd songs band.
Yeah.
Not that you'd know.
Not you'd know. It does have that prog rock influence throughout. I didn't know about the Father John Misty connection, but again, that doesn't surprise me either. Now you've said it, it has lyrically in terms of the style of Father John Misty, who we reviewed last year and liked very much. There's something kind of similar in terms of the pattern of the songs and how they're put together, and the humour as well, which runs across from that. But I think music that's sort of verging on the psychedelic edge of prog rock, that's also very much in here as well. In particular, there's references to London all over this as well.
There is, yeah.
I mean, Trafalgar Square, the opening track, is the most obvious one because there it is. But there's also references to Piccadilly, Oxford Circus, and all kinds of kooks and crannies all over the place, which I liked. But moving on. Now, quite early on in the album, I really liked the track Me. Something both vocally and musically very much like early to mid solo John Lennon period, somewhere lodged between Imagine and Mind Games. Yeah. Give it a date. And obviously the track's called Me as well, which obviously I like. Not that Lennon was ever egocentric. No, really enjoyed that. Really for me, Trafalgar Square, Me, really strong opening tracks. Also really enjoyed some of the humour. There's a couple of really explicit tracks on here.
There are, yeah.
There's a lyric in there, I'm not going to say it, but you know the one, it kind of rhymes with, there's two words that rhyme with each other. Yeah. That may involve a sexual act, which I thought was hilarious, particularly in the context of a generational view of a slightly older generation looking down on a slightly younger generation and seeing how people get their rocks off these days.
And particularly also in when you're kind of couching it almost in a kind of, you know, as you say, a Laurel Canyon West Coast 70s laid back singer-songwriter album that's got lots of swearies. Suddenly.
Yes, it suddenly made me blush. I was like, oh really, are we going down there? He is. So I really enjoyed that. But again, very varied towards the end of the album. It's a couple of albums we've had like this. I think it was The Young Fathers was the other one, where towards the end of the album, suddenly the genre changes entirely. And those last few tracks, it almost felt like it could come from a different album. I like that though. That seemed to work.
Yeah, so it went more country rock towards the end.
Yeah, it worked with this. It worked with the Young Fathers too, which we reviewed earlier. I very much like that. What did you think? And when is he playing live?
End of the Road Festival in August.
Excellent.
I only get my gripe in first of all.
Yeah, I knew it was coming. You were wearing the T-shirt. It was all too good to be true.
God, this album's long.
Oh, okay.
Really long record.
I'm getting used to these shorter records, aren't we?
I know. Yeah, this is a really long record, and I struggled with that actually more than anything else. Not with the material on it, because I think, generally speaking, I think that, as you highlighted, I think the quality of the songs is pretty strong. Yeah. And if you play anything randomly off it, you kind of go, oh yeah, it's pretty quite like that. Yeah, quite like that. And I agree with you as well that it kind of it does blend that kind of 70s singer-songwriter, almost Lennon-y kind of stuff with a bit of the Pink Floyd influence in there. You can feel you've got a bit of kind of glam on Trafalgar Square, and it starts off kind of all kind of Pink Floydy, and then suddenly you get the kind of almost kind of T-Rexy kind of guitars coming in. And then there's probably the most Pink Floyd song on it, which is pure 60s Pink Floyd, is Miriam Montague, which is just...
Even the title. Yeah,
which is just literally just like, hey, I'm going to do a 60s retro track. It's great, but it's just, but again, it's in some ways it's kind of strange thinking, what, hey? And yeah, it's I said it, I like it. I'd prefer it if it was shorter, but as you say, everything you said about it is true, and particularly some of the more humorous moments of it are definitely worth listening to just for that thing. But yeah, on the whole, thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
So we end with the return of the Breeders, their fifth album, or their first album in 10 years.
Yeah.
Again, I probably expected to be saying, "Oh, we've saved the best for last," here, because I am a big Breeders fan, and they are a band that have been mentioned in this podcast quite a lot in reference to other artists. We've reviewed a lot of acts that sound either like Breeders or occasionally like Belly. So in some ways, it's like, oh, the real thing's back. And it sounds like the Breeders, so that's a good thing. It sounds like the Breeders, the slightly off-key guitars, the way Kim Deal plays bass and her immediately identifiable vocals are all there. But despite all that, the album felt a bit flat to me overall.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts off all right. I mean, this for me is that classic kind of side one, side two situation. I mean, I think side one of the album is pretty solid, and you're thinking, yeah, it's all right. Particularly, you've got Waiting Car, All Nerve, and Metal Goth, which were tracks 2, 3, and 4, which are really strong. You're thinking, yeah, this is pretty good. But then you get to the second half of the album, which is essentially, for me, filler. And filler on a 30-minute record for a band that shouldn't be doing filler, was disappointing. So I don't think it's an awful record, but I think it's a hugely disappointing record, and for me it's only half a record.
I concur. This is the first album I listened to of the set.
Ditto.